Mary Sayers. My name is Mary Sayers, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the National Disability Research Partnership. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you from the lands of the Bunurong people here in Gippsland. Just a visual description of me. I've got blonde hair, I'm wearing clear glasses, I'm wearing a black top. You might be able to see my red necklace, and I'm a white older woman, I'd like to say. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're meeting across Australia. We know that we're on First Nations land and we respect First Nations people on our land, on these lands. It's on this land that we live, work, play, swim, and dream together. First Nations people have lived here for many, many thousands of years, and we now all share this land. We honour and respect all First Nations people and elders. I also want to show my deep respects to all First Nations people joining us today, and for those who are speaking as well, and recognise the important contributions they make to our communities and our work together in the disability community. Before we begin, I just want to mention, as you are all aware, that today's session is being run on Zoom meeting format, not a webinar. This means you can see the other participants on your screen, but you do not need to keep your camera on if you don't want to. And you can adjust your view settings to suit your preferences. If you prefer to keep it in gallery view, you can do, but if you put it in speaker view, click on the button at the top right of the corner and you can switch to speaker view, and that highlights always the active speaker. And gallery view shows multiple participants at once. If you would like to pin a speaker or an interpreter, if you want to keep that on, you can press that and pin the person on the screen, hover over their video and click the three dots that says more, and then select pin the video. If you need any help at all with any of your settings, feel free to ask the chat and our team will assist you. And you'll see in the drop-down box in the Zoom, there is NDRP help, which is Sue Tape, who is here to help any participants today. For those of you who are new to the National Disability Research Partnership, and we like to call it the NDRP because we love an acronym in the disability community, we fund research by and with people with disability, and today is our first event of the year. We are bringing together today people with disability and their organisations, researchers and others who are interested in disability-led research to connect with each other and hear from others who have co-designed and co-produced research before so that they can share their learnings and approaches. And why is this important? Because in 2025, we are launching our first round of research funding, which will support the co-design and co-production of research that will be led by and with people with disability. Our role is not just limited to funding research. We also want to bring together people to lead and learn together. Our funding decisions are led by our NDRP research agenda, which many of you will have seen before. This research agenda was developed after long consultation with the disability community. It covers many topics that are organised into 12 major areas of research that are important for people with disability. And all these research topics are guided by an approach to enable the human rights of people with disability to be upheld. We've gone through a process with our board to prioritise one area of the research agenda for 2025. And this year we'll fund one of the research agenda areas on the topic of safety of people with disability. Our role is to create and nurture structures and relationships that support and make it easier to generate the evidence needed to drive meaningful and lasting improvements for the safety of people with disability across Australia. In 2025, there'll be 2 grant rounds. We will support the teams we fund to connect and learn together as they work. Round 1 will fund small projects to co-design research and/or to bring together what's known about the topic. Round 2, which will be later this year, will fund longer-term research that creates new knowledge. So round 1 funding will open with the release of the funding policy and grant guidelines on the 27th of February, which will be available on our website, with applications open from the 17th of March until the 28th of April. To be eligible, the project should have a timeline of 10 months or less, in line with our NDRP principles, and all projects must be inclusive and use co-design approaches. Hence why we're here today to talk about co-design. There are 2 types of projects we'll fund in round 1, and if you can give me a moment, I'm just going to share my screen. So can I just have a hands up from you, Jill, that the screen's working?
Jill speaking. Yes, it's working, and you're on presenter view at the moment.
Fantastic.
You change the display setting. Oh, sorry, you're actually not. You're on the other view. So if you change display settings, we should be right.
Sorry.
Jill
Is
speaking.
that
Up the top display settings, just above the slide. This is good actually, because it's making me feel more relaxed. Because total perfection makes me feel nervous.
Is that okay? Thanks, Jill.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for your patience. There's always a tech challenge when you're doing this sort of thing. So the funding for round 1, as I said, will be on the topic of safety of people with disability. And all projects will use co-design approaches. They'll be funded by 2 streams, which we've outlined here. So co-design future research that is needed to develop a research proposal to use in an application for research funding. And so if you like, with that first stream, we're funding the things that often don't get funded, which is the co-design of the research, so that research teams, people with disability organisations can come together to really design what the research should be. The second stream is to use knowledge synthesis methods to bring together what is already known about a topic and co-produce reports, briefs, guidelines, or similar. And so with these 2 streams, what we will be providing to you is more information about these streams. And we'll post a link to our website in the chat where you'll find more information. But I'd also like to encourage you to register for our 6th of March session, where we're actually going to go into detail about the research guidelines and approach. So if you're not already registered for that, if you could please register for our 6th of March session. So as part of our commitment to accessibility and inclusion, we are working to embed accessible ways of working in everything we do. And I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. Including in sessions like this. So please note that this session is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel for others to access, and so you could share it with your colleagues. You can turn on the captions. Live captions are available by selecting the CC or live transcript button. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have Auslan interpreters, and you can pin the Auslan interpreters. please feel free to use the chat as well to share your thoughts, to ask questions, and please be mindful of others in the chat. In terms of breaks, we'll have a 5-minute break during the session if you need to step away at any time, and please feel free to do so. And if you need any assistance at all during the session, can you please privately message Sue Tape from the NDRP in the chat? We're here to help, hopefully, and Sue's just showing her face. I'm just going to share my screen again and hope this works. And again, I'm going to check with Jill that it is working okay. Fantastic. So today for our session, we're going to do an introduction to co-design and co-production, and I'll introduce my colleague Jill in a moment, who's going to talk us through that introduction. We're going to showcase do two case studies. Case study 1 is the Voices of Deaf and Hard Hearing mock. Then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to hand over to the Summer Foundation, and then we'll have a facilitated panel question and answer session where you're welcome to ask questions, and you're welcome to ask questions in the chat anytime throughout. So I'm going to stop sharing now, if I can find the button. And introduce my lovely colleague, Gillian Mason. So Gillian is our head of our research program, who'll be taking us through co-designing research. Gillian is a passionate advocate and thought leader, and at the heart of Gillian's work is a commitment to collaboration and co-design, ensuring that people with disability are not just participants, but leaders in shaping research and driving meaningful change. Her dedication to fostering inclusive practices and empowering diverse voices has been instrumental in advancing the principles we stand for at the NDRP. Today, Gillian will guide us through the role of co-design in impactful research and how co-design fits within co-production and aligns with the NDRP principles and values. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Gillian.
Thank you. Those introductions always feel longer on in reality than they ever look on a page. Yeah. Let me now ask for a confirmation that the slides are up properly. Thanks, Sue, and thanks, Mary, so much for the introduction. Now, where to start? I will go over our guiding principles and then talk a little bit about where I'm coming from in all of this, and both geographically as well as kind of my background coming into this. So our guiding principles are principles that are relevant to everything we do at the NDRP. So our work that we do on a daily basis is guided by them, and the research that we fund needs to be guided by those as well. So there's a lot of information about these on our website. At the high level, everything we do is about advancing high quality research and research that actually is going to make a difference to disability policy and practice to advance the rights of people with disability in Australia. I know they sound like kind of fancy words or a tagline, but it is very true that we want to bring together people who have research expertise, people who have expertise of living with disability, accessing systems, to put together research that actually will make a difference to those things. So it's not just lip service we're paying to that, but we're taking actions to make that first principle a reality. In everything we do, we want to value the knowledge of people with disability in research, but also in the way that we do our daily business. All of the projects that we fund are also, we want to see research approaches that will strengthen disability research capacity. And when we say that, we don't actually mean only teach people with disability who maybe haven't been involved in research before how to do research. We really mean strengthen capacity of everyone across the system to work together in ways that are co-designerly and in ways that help everybody to be able to share their expertise, share the knowledge they have, and make a difference. So we mean that very broadly. And then we also want to share the research findings widely and in accessible ways and useful ways so that they can be taken up and used for action rather than, published in a research paper that maybe sits on the shelf getting dusty. There are principles. Where I'm coming from. So I am a white woman who I'm a descendant of families who immigrated to this country. I've got a mixed European background, and I was born and raised on a Awabakal country here, which is Lake Macquarie, and I've moved now to Newcastle, which is called Malulumbar, Land of the Sea Ferns. And this picture that's on my slide on the screen is a beautiful sunset, which we're so lucky to be able to see really regularly over the water. So I really enjoy my time on the land of the sea ferns and pay respect and acknowledge the Aboriginal people who have lived here for 60,000 years. They're Australia's, and in fact, the world's first scientists and researchers, and communities have been co-designing stuff together for years and years. Co-design itself isn't new. It's great that there is more and more co-design happening in the kinds of research that universities run and lead these days, but co-design is certainly not something that the research or the academic world created. So that's something important just to think about. I wanted to just tell you a bit more too about where I come from and my background, because every time you enter into anything, whether it's co-design of research or collaborative work in general, it's always really important to spend time building relationships, but also kind of reflecting on where you come from, especially if you're entering into a co-design project as someone who doesn't have direct experience of the issue or the opportunity that the work is going to be about. It's really important not to think, well, everybody with this direct experience is different, so I need to kind of meet their needs. You can't do that well unless you reflect on your own background and culture and position on the work. So I've worked for just over 20 years, mostly in health and medical research. I'm a physiotherapist, and I'm also queer. I'm a parent. I am disabled, and I'm neurodivergent and live with a couple of conditions that result in physical impairments. So my experience of disability is really broad. And then as a person, I come to this work with biases, with values, and with cultures that are specific to my own life. So that's a bit about me. I'm certainly not an expert in co-design. I'm not a trained designer, and I've learned a lot from communities and from working with designers in research over the years. That's a bit of scene setting. Now, I think the word co-design is maybe one of these, I wrote co-words later on the slides, kind of one of those maybe C words, co-words that is used a lot and probably used without much thought. It's a word that when I hear it, honestly, I have a bit of a reaction. What we're talking about is, we will talk about co-design very specifically, but we're talking about doing research with people rather than research for people or research to people. So let me explain. What I mean by research to is where there's research where if you're working with a community, you might come and tell them about what you're going to do. You might ask for their opinions, and you might also, tell people that they have a say, but you haven't made it clear really what they'll have a say in or how that might look. So I would call that research too. And I think how I've got the Zoom displayed on my screen, I can't see if anyone's nodding or reacting. So if I tell a joke, I'll have to just assume that you're laughing. But I think most of us, anyone that's turned up today, most of us have had an experience, or we've done research in ways that we've looked back and thought, really, we said co-design, but it wasn't. We said co-design, but what that looked like was a consultation, or it looked like people, communities having a say in some parts of it. But really, we probably might reflect and think, I think that maybe sat along the spectrum of research to rather than kind of research with. That's my take on that. I can't even see the chat at the moment. Please feel free to post questions in there, because if we don't get to them now, we can pick them up in our panel discussion later. So research for, as I think this through, there's there's not a natural hierarchy either of co-design always being the best thing to do or a possible thing to do, but I still wouldn't call it co-design or researching with if what is happening is researchers are having focus groups with people or basically taking information or stories from people, even when done very respectfully, and then taking that away and doing the research for them, guided by those insights. So to me, I would consider that more a user-centered design process rather than a co-design process. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, but I wouldn't be calling that co-design. That fits along the research for level of the spectrum. So research with is really what we kind of want to focus on today. And that's research with is where I would start to use co-words. So the words collaboration, true collaboration, co-design, co-production, these words are used interchangeably a lot. And that can be okay, because the reality is in any project, there's going to be lots of different things that have to get done across the timeline, and not all of those things can be co-designed, even if you're approaching a project using a genuine, authentic co-design approach. So I thought that was important to mention. And also the views that I'm presenting today, the content that I'm presenting today, it's informed from lots of places. I didn't want to give you kind of an academic presentation, so I haven't referenced anything, but there are some key references that I drew from to put together this talk, and I'll share them in the chat so that there's some acknowledgement. But I mean, take this not as a course on co-design, but some explainers of the language we use, and some views that I think could be really helpful in thinking about how might we approach projects, and then how might we write about those projects in a grant application. So if you've seen the slides in advance, if you've got the deck in front of you, you might know what's coming up. If that's the case, I'm expecting excellent karaoke performances. I can't see you on the screen, so dancing probably would help to entertain other people as well. But even when we're doing research with the co-words, research with, to try and figure out how to describe it, or how to decide when you call something co-design, when you decide co-design, not really possible, we're doing something collaborative. A great way to think about it, and I'm informed by someone who I really respect in this co-design space called Emma Blomkamp. She talks about thinking about how deep is your co. So ever since I read Emma's blog, and we'll put the link to that blog in the chat if you'd like to read it, How Deep Is Your Co, I've had this song stuck in my head. So I thought I'd give you that gift and get it stuck in yours as well. So just because you say that something is co-design or co-production, it doesn't mean that it is. So if we think about how deep is your co, and then describe the work that's ahead accurately, that helps us to make commitments to communities that we can keep. And it helps us also just to understand what kind of planning might be required in the different types of work. So lots of words now. Within the co-production of research, so we're thinking research with, we're thinking doing things together in collaborative ways. Co-production of research to me speaks about an approach where you're sharing power between all the members of the research team and basically just doing all the stuff together. Doing all the stuff together, the same as if you were, a team of people playing sport, or if you're a member of a band in the orchestra, you can play together, do together without everyone having to do exactly the same thing. You have set roles. You all make decisions about how you might approach the game or the concert or the work. And then there's practice and planning, and you work through different stages depending on what you're doing, right? So think about co-production of research as the overarching umbrella. And then there's lots of different parts of any project. And you can use co-words in thinking about the work, describing the work. You might be co-deciding, co-planning. The co-designing bit comes in there, and we'll just touch on kind of what I would like you to be thinking about co-design should be describing. Co-do the research, co-evaluate the research, share power the whole way through.
Sue speaking. You've got 4 minutes left, Jill.
Thanks, Sue. I really love the way this team helps each other all the time. So in co-production of research, in any of the co-words, honestly, everyone should have a role in knowledge creation. If it's a teeny tiny role that some people are playing, maybe you're kind of down the left of the spectrum towards moving to co-design, but everyone has a role in knowledge creation. I put this slide up because I'm coming from a health and medical research background mostly, and our colleague Helen Bevan and her colleague Goran Hendricks talk about patient-centered healthcare in their work. And this has been a diagram too that has really helped me think through co-design, co-production. When we talk about user-centered design, or we talk about putting someone, communities, people with disability at the center, if we do that and then everybody else does the work around them but asks them for their opinions or understands what their needs are, we can end up with these approaches that still are research to or research for. Anything co-designally really involves us moving the structures and creating the conditions where that person, the people who the research most directly impacts or who are there sharing lived expertise of the system, whether that person be a person with disability or be a service provider who's joining a team as a co-designer, bringing their professional expertise to the team, everyone should be working in partnership. Again, there we're thinking just in a sport, like in a sporting team or in an orchestra, doesn't mean everyone does the same amount of work necessarily. Everyone can have a separate role, but it certainly looks like partnership. The co-design. Co-design, there's a couple of parts to it. It's a part of broader co-production. It is true that you can have co-design without co-production. So you might be working on a research project that really looks like a couple of people doing a project, and you might co-design a small element of that, do the rest of the project without co-producing it, or co-design can fit within a co-production project. A couple of things about co-design. As we said right at the start, it's used all the time. This word is used all over the place, way too often, but there's kind of two ways that you could use it authentically, I think. There's co-design mindsets. There's really sticking to your principles and making sure you do things together when you're co-designing. But really, when we say the word design, it should talk about a process of making something. That process of kind of creative thinking and doing, where you're planning, testing, having ideas together and creating something new. You don't know the outputs in advance. You might have to change things along the way, but it's a creative process. And before co-design can happen, and I'm so pleased that we've got colleagues here to share their experiences, you really have to spend time and money and, slow the work down and build the conditions that allow people to understand each other and share power, but also to do co-design stuff and to have a generative process. You have to create conditions that support creative thinking and generation. There's plenty of colleagues with way more expertise in doing this, different methods than I have, but that's an important point. The last thing is to say, I'm not going to give you a course on how to think about which different roles people might have in a co-design crew, but I did want to leave you with a reflection on the fact that we come into co-design teams or co-design crews, maybe with different professional experiences or different lived experiences. But if we're coming together to create something, it's important that we actually get really clear on who's going to do what in that process. So in that process, I would not be a physiotherapist or a researcher. I might be someone bringing physiotherapy expertise or my own lived experience expertise and probably other technical skills maybe. And we get together and decide how we might do the work. And we won't be there in our roles from the outside. So think about that later, I think, as we go through the case studies. And to finish up, so I went for an extra minute, thinking about the different ways we've defined terms. If you are going to put a grant application into our grant round, you do need to show us how deep is your co. And I just thought I'd leave you with this. It's a karaoke opportunity 2 is here. We're going to not sing. That's all I wanted to say. Let's stop sharing and hand back over to Mary. Maybe without enough warning for Mary.
Thank you very
Sorry, Mary.
much. No, thank you, Jill, and that was fantastic. I love that song. So we're now moving on to our first case study. And so it's time to hear about a fantastic project that really brings co-design to life in a research context. NDRP, in our pilot phase, funded a brilliant co-design project led by Jody Barney, the founder of the Deaf Indigenous Community Consultancy, and Dr. Alexandra Devine, Alexandra, from the University of Melbourne. This case study builds on their work with the Hey, Hear Me Out project and focuses on co-designing research and resources to support deaf and hard of hearing First Nations people. What's especially exciting about this project is how it combines deep community engagement with practical co-design tools and measures to assess impact. We're lucky to have Jody and Alexandra here today to share their experiences and lessons learned and the impact of this important work. And over to you both.
Hello, how is everybody? My name is Jody Barney. And prior to starting, I would first of all like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, and we pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm now here on the lands of I'm not sure if I pronounced this correctly, as the interpreter, your Tila lands. Thank you. And that's in Shepparton, Victoria. I too would like to acknowledge our First Nations mob, our deaf and hard of hearing members of the communities in Australia. And it's also very important to be talking about our deaf elders within the mobs that give us the advice and our instructions throughout our journey within our co-design process, and as well as at the research projects that we're undertaking. I do know that we all agree that this year, next year, and I guess, many years to come within our future generations, First Nations people will continue that it will be led by our mob, for our mob, and that's important to us. So I'm now going to hand over to Alex, and she will just go through a few slides and lead those slides. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Alex Devine. I'm in my almost late 40s. I am white with brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and my headset. So thank you, Jody, for that acknowledgement and introduction. What we're talking about today is more of an evolving process towards our current ways of working. So this work really started with a Victorian government funding of a research project looking at NDIS plan utilisation. The focus of this research was on participants with psychosocial disability, First Nations participants, and culturally and linguistically diverse participants. And while we did have team members with disability and a really stellar external advisory group, the project itself really had limited or no co-design elements when we were developing the project. So when we were speaking to one of our external advisory group members from AFDO, he suggested that we invited Jody to also join the advisory group so we had more Indigenous representation. And then that very initial discussion, we realised that we needed more than Jody on an external advisory group, and we invited her to join the project. So really in phase one of this partnership, it was really the University of Melbourne team were leading this research. And then Jody was invited into the process to support the process at a later stage. So past the prioritisation and past the design process. But what we did, and this was during COVID, so a lot was done through online meetings. We worked together to adapt the approaches that we'd already developed, and the materials that we'd already designed to ensure that First Nations people and also deaf and hard of hearing participants were able to much more effectively participate in the research. And then Jody led yarnings with First Nations and also deaf and hard of hearing participants. And this was obviously a much greater depth of engagement than the research team would have been able to have if we'd been trying to lead those discussions ourselves. So in this stage, the data was analysed and led by the research team. We interviewed more than 100 people, a smaller subsample of which were First Nations and another sample who were deaf or hard of hearing. So we led the analysis with ongoing discussion with Jody, and then we worked with Jody and also James Blythe from Auslan Consultants to develop easy read and Auslan disseminations, and Jody led the dissemination back to community. The research really highlighted gaps in knowledge because we focused on First Nations participants and deaf participants, but not so much First Nations deaf and hard of hearing participants. But it was quite clear in that analysis that this was a group that was experiencing really significant challenges navigating the NDIS, which led to phase 2, or our second project, which was the NDRP pilot project that Sue talked about. And this phase was much more of a research partnership. We had a lot more time to develop our ways of working, and to do so was really resourced in our budget within the pilot. Although many of you will know they were still quite small projects. And the prioritisation and approach and engagement with individuals and community was very much led by Jody. So was far more equal in terms of power sharing. The grant requirements meant that University of Melbourne did have to be the grant holder, and as the differently experienced researchers at the time, we also had the oversight of the ethics and the budget and the reporting, but this was very much guided by Jody. We also, what really helped was we involved one of Jody's longtime collaborators, who you can see down the bottom. It's a photo of Dr. Damien Howard. And Damien and Jody had worked for a long time, developing bicultural ways of working and training and conducting research. And this was incredibly useful because the whole journey was a steep learning curve, mainly for me. But Damien was also able, when perhaps culturally Jody, wouldn't not tell me off, but Damien really acted also as a bit of a conduit in my earlier partnerships with Jody. It was a much more collaborative data analysis and lots more two-way reflection. Jody, did you? Yeah, and again, yes, it just led to the next project because through this research, there was again a huge need to enhance culturally and communication responsive services and supports. Jody, I might hand over to you if there's anything else you wanted to add about the co-design process in this particular project.
Yeah, if I could just add to that too. While we had, I guess, the university team together and the collaborative team together, I also had, I guess, the cultural advisory group, which was external from the project itself. So it wasn't just, it was me that was making all the decisions that we were, going through on our journey. I certainly had other First Nations, deaf and hard of hearing people, different types of groups, genders and roles and ages, that we made appropriate cultural decisions on protocol, just ensuring that what it meant for us and what we shared with the team and what was asked within the community was shared because of the large diversity of Indigenous, deaf and hard of hearing people in the community. So therefore, because it is such a diverse community, we need to be culturally sensitive, and we needed to do this in a culturally safe way. So because there was the underlying, I guess, reasons why this needed to happen, it wasn't just me that was coming across with these ideas. I certainly had the authority and I had to respond to such matters. And so therefore I had that authority to be able to make those decisions, but I certainly had this as a collaborative way of engaging and trying to ensure too that, I guess, my way of working in the community is very different to most typical researchers and their process of doing research. So how to modify that with ethics to ensure that we were able to work together to make that happen. So it was a huge learning curve, I think, as well for me. So I think that way we were able to get the most accurate and appropriate information so we can improve Queenslanders' lives and, you know, on the ground as well.
And then the third phase, and this is where I, just to introduce Binaguri, which was very much co-designed with community. This was a grant from the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. But because we had done the NDRP project and really highlighted the need for resources to improve service delivery, we received some funding, which Jody's Deaf Indigenous Community Consultancy was the lead organisation in the project, and Jody was therefore in charge of all the budgeting. We helped with ethics and reporting, but it was very much the power shift was now held with Deaf Indigenous Community Consulting, and then we were very much the support, and this was where that next level of co-design with community really took place. Over to you, Jody.
So Binaguri is in Queensland, what that means is that the ears don't work properly. So for people that are not aware of who I am, I'm a Queensland Aboriginal woman and I'm a proud Binaguri woman and Urangan woman from southeast North Queensland coast. So part of my work has not only just been in Queensland, but nationally. So this particular sign here means that we consulted with many, many deaf and hard of hearing Indigenous people to consult about how we can better engage with the community and how we can actually improve the training modules online. So these training modules online were free, and it was part of the NDIA Quality and Safeguards Commission funding. So they could provide some work, some awareness training, online training as well. So therefore people were getting some information, able to access some information, activities, videos, questions, and they were able to engage in a particular module with the outcome of a certificate there. So this process, we had to ensure, check, double check, triple check different types of levels of co-design processes. So it wasn't just, the first co-design, it was the language co-design. It was also the co-design of, I guess, the research as well. And then there was the Queensland Safeguards, co-design too. So therefore we needed to ensure that we could somehow make this work and provide a system that will certainly benefit the co-design process, which will hopefully then extend into the next step of our training opportunities ongoing. So for the co-design I guess, principle. It's to ensure that people who engage within perhaps training or consultation or advice, we actually paid them appropriately. So they were remunerated for their time. And that was vital for that happened. I believe that myself and the community really was able to, talk about their lives. And obviously the community knew better than what I did too. So it's valuable that we respected the community's knowledge transfer in these moments. And we did it the appropriate way. So we developed research and principles based on this, but based on the standards that we had set up. So research, sharing and caring of information within the community was something that was really important to us. Over to you, Alex.
And just to highlight, yeah, again, so there was obviously co-design between Jody and myself, but also Jody talks about the different ways of working between saltwater and freshwater people as well, and being really cognizant of the different cultural connections and community approvals that had to be navigated before that this research could be done. And also, yeah, it was really not possible. It would not have been possible had Jody not have had those long-standing relationships with the community up in Queensland. And also, it wouldn't have been possible if the research and the modules that we were developing weren't aligning with the priorities of this community. I think one thing that's really really evident as this process has gone on is just about that enduring reciprocity and that mutual respect and exchange between Jody and the community, between myself and the community, and between Jody and myself, in terms of taking on that cultural responsibility to address any immediate needs of individuals and the community, and that this responsibility really extends beyond the research team and beyond the research as well. So, if something comes up that's a priority for Jody, then the research is put on hold while we can support that process. I can see Sue, which means we're moving on to the next slide. Some of the challenges were definitely, I'll just mention the first one. We were still not beholden to the expectations of the funder, but the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission were really keen to be involved, which was great. So we had really regular meetings with them. But because of various challenges, there was sometimes a need for advocacy to explain why processes often took longer than they anticipated, or even we anticipated. Do you want to talk about some of the other challenges, Jody?
Yeah, sure. For me, it was more the cultural authority and the processes. So there was sorry business, and we had ceremonies. We had to ensure that people that I guess needed emergency services and supports, then that was able to be provided. So we could advocate from different directions, and not just that we go into the community and think that we can work that way. There were different processes. We had real priorities and processes to be able to determine how we can support the community. So therefore, it's appearing that we are committed and we have the right intent to be actually serving the communities there. We had floods, we had cyclones, you name it. So, we had to go remote. We had all sorts of issues that did pop up. But I think that it certainly built character for all of us at the same time. But for me, I guess, it's the normal life that presents to me. But in the co-design space, I think it was certainly, something that we had to navigate. There was some times where we were a little bit concerned or anxious about how things would work out. But it taught people how to be a little bit more laid back and allow conversations to have a natural flow. and therefore we could just go with the flow and see what happens. Obviously there were rivers that come and go and flow differently, and it's the same sort of process. So I think that the interaction with the community themselves, it was really important not to have opinions of people's lives, but rather show that our commitment was there to learn from them, and also to try and encourage and support where possible too. And remembering too that as a deaf Aboriginal person myself, I was involved in the research, but regardless of the research, I was there to be involved in the community, which was my community, and not just Queensland, but nationally. So therefore, I guess I had another commitment to fulfill there. I was overseas and there were all sorts of things happening as well for me, my end. And I think it's where it's part of, I guess, the co-design process, how we're able to develop better relationships within the communities if you're not able to have those foundations there. It's really difficult to get that rich knowledge. So you really do need to ensure that the co-design process is done really smoothly to make that an easier process.
And I think we were just going to finish off by talking about, we were reflecting the other day that there's lots of parallels between cultural reciprocity and co-design, and it's always not even a two-way, the rivers and the seas, they're always flowing in and out, but the main ultimate goal is to enhance the knowledge of the community and ensure that we're producing knowledge that can be used by the community in a way that best suits their needs.
Gillian speaking. Thank you both so much for sharing. I really enjoy hearing stories and, the stuff that happened in real life as a way of learning. It helps me more than reading it in a research article as the only way. And really looking forward to speaking to you about that more in our panel discussion later. I would like to throw to a break, let you all know that there's 5.5 minutes until we're going to recommence. You can do what you like, but extra points if you do a bit more karaoke practice, and bring that energy back at 2 o'clock.
Welcome back, everyone. That went quick, the 5 minutes. So while we're waiting, just making sure everyone's back, I just want to say how lovely it is that everyone is interacting in the chat. That's exactly lovely in terms of people connecting up and sharing what they're learning. So thank you, everyone. I hope you've had a chance to have a bit of a refresh. We're now moving on to our second case study, which features the amazing work of the Summer Foundation team. The Summer Foundation conducts research to improve housing and support for people with disability who need 24/7 assistance. This session will explore how co-design has been embedded at different stages of their projects, from resource development through to research design and evaluation. We'll begin with Cornelia Wellecke, a PhD, and I hope I've got that right, Cornelia, a PhD researcher who will share how she has worked with an advisory group through her research. And Dr. Mark Brown, her supervisor, will then join her to reflect on what they've learned and how this approach has evolved over the course of the project. Following that, we'll hear from Dr. Kate De Cruz and Dr. Stacey Oliver, who led a co-design project to create and evaluate resources for people with disability living in supported accommodation. Kate and Stacey will share their experience and lessons learned and how co-design shaped both the creation and evaluation of these resources. And remember, keep your questions coming in the chat because following this session, we'll have a panel Q&A as well. So Cornelia, over to you to get us started.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my slides start working.
Jill speaking. Yes, Cornelia, that's perfect.
Great. And I think Stacey is kicking off our presentation.
Hi everyone. Yes, I am Stacey and I'll get started today. So I'm a white female in my mid-30s and I have long-ish blonde hair. And I am a research fellow at the Summer Foundation. So I will just start by providing some context to our work at the Summer Foundation. And then I'll hand over to Cornelia, who will discuss her learnings from a reference group through her PhD research. So first though, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which we are joining this meeting today. I am joining this meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and the waters across this continent where others are joining from, and also from where both our research and our co-design work takes place. Cool. So partnering with people with disability is really at the core of our work at Summer Foundation. And we achieve this through having a dedicated co-design team and also a research team. And we do this by working in partnership with La Trobe University. So to embed meaningful partnerships across our work, we have an established organisational structure that ensures that people with disability are actively involved in shaping both our research as well as our broader initiatives. So currently at the Summer Foundation, we employ, I think, about 50 people with disability on casual contracts, but we also regularly engage with a broader group of about 200 people with disability who contribute to our co-design projects. And we also have people with disability working on our research team. Our work always begins with the aim of wanting to better understand the lived experience of disability. So we really want to know what's working, what's not working, and what is needed. And we gather these insights through a range of methods, and this includes co-design workshops, but also in-depth interviews, surveys, and literature reviews. So this knowledge directly informs our research program, shaping our evidence-based solutions and hoping to achieve real-world impact. So that's just an overall summary of our approach to partnering with people with disability and how we have established some structures to ensure that this partnership is meaningful and ongoing. So now I will hand over to Cornelia, who will discuss her work with the PhD reference group.
All right, thank you, Stacey. Hi everyone. So as Stacey said, I'm currently conducting a PhD with Summer Foundation and La Trobe Uni. I'm a woman in my late 20s with dark blonde hair. And today I will talk a bit about our learnings from running a reference group during my PhD. So just to give you a little bit of background, in my PhD, we are aiming to establish an evidence base to inform peer support programs for people with neurological disability. And we're doing this through 3 different projects, which are all trying to understand the peer support experience. We established a reference group who will provide advice throughout these 3 projects. The group consists of 6 people who have a range of neurological disabilities, and they all have a very strong interest in peer support. And just a quick note, the symbol that you can see on the left is actually one that the group and I recently designed to represent peer support. You're already seeing the work of the reference group in action. So let me go into a bit more detail about how we are engaging our reference group. When we first formed our group, we went through a bit of an introductory phase, holding both one-on-one and group meetings to get to know each other a bit more and set expectations on how we want to work with each other going forward. And with that foundation in place, we then started our engagements for our projects. In particular, we are planning to engage our group at 3 different time points for each of our 3 projects. So first, we want to engage the group at the beginning of each project during the planning stage, where we can, for example, discuss our research instruments or recruitment strategies. Secondly, we will engage the group while we are conducting each project. For example, we can draw on the community connections from our reference group to help with recruitment. And we are actually about to start recruiting for one of our projects next month. And I've already received a few messages from our members saying that they have a few people lined up for the study already, which is really encouraging. And then lastly, we will work with our group at the end of each project to discuss our findings or talk about different ways we could distribute our findings to the community. And then I guess outside of our project specific engagements, we are providing regular email updates and also seeking feedback from the group about our engagements. And I realize this may all sound a little abstract, so I thought it would be nice if I give you a concrete example of one of our previous engagements. So let me show you how we engaged our group when we were planning one of the projects in my PhD, which was an interview study. So during the planning phase, we had a group meeting and also a few one-on-one meetings. And during the meetings, we discussed our overall approach to the study, such as our research questions. And we also discussed our recruitment strategies, such as where and how we could find participants. And we created a recruitment flyer, of which you can see the final product on the left here. We also discussed what kinds of questions I could ask in the interviews. And after we put together an interview guide, I then met with one of the reference group members to do a mock interview, which I guess gave us the chance to pilot the interview guide, but also for me to gain a bit more experience before going into my first actual interview. All right, I also wanted to share a few key learnings that have come up for me from our previous engagements. And I guess one of my biggest challenges has been balancing time. The engagements with the group obviously take quite a bit of preparation. And on top of that, we also want to spend time on really building our relationships with each member, which obviously competes with an already busy research schedule. And also research can move slowly at times. And during these periods, I found it quite challenging to find ways and set aside time to continue to engage our group. On the upside, some of the things I found have worked really well is that we set up the engagement by casually employing our members. I feel this really helped reinforce the value we place on their input, but it also allowed us to have some formal conversations around expectations for working together. I also learned the importance of flexibility. As I got to know our members over time, I realized that good engagement may look quite different for different members. And so I guess I started to adapt my approach over time. For example, I'm now meeting some of our members one-on-one instead of in a group. And I think this flexibility is really important to give each member a chance to fully contribute, especially because at summer, we are often working with people who may have cognitive or communication difficulties. All right, Mark, I think the idea is for us to now have a bit of a chat. Maybe I just stop sharing.
Yeah, Cornelia, thanks. I wanted to ask you, look, I'm one of your 3 supervisors. And at the beginning of your PhD, I was actually a bit skeptical about the value a reference group across the whole of your PhD, the value it would have, given that you've got 3 supervisors. We have a variety of experience, giving you all sorts of advice and being opinionated. And your research question is fundamentally about lived experience, and your methodology is about talking to people with lived experience anyway. I was kind of concerned that the time and effort that would go into running this process would make your life as a PhD student harder. But have you found it more of a help than a hindrance, and why?
Yes, I think especially at the beginning of my PhD, I feel the group has made me a lot more connected to my research topic. I feel my understanding of the topic has become a lot deeper and more colorful, because I think there's a big difference between just going to the literature and reading about something than actually hearing sort of real examples of what that looks like in practice. And yeah, you're right. We're obviously having these conversations in our supervision meetings, and I will be doing interviews later on too. But I guess hearing such a range of perspectives and experiences early on in the research process is what I feel has been really helpful and unique for me, especially for setting me up for my PhD at the beginning of the whole research process. But I also think that the group will have a really big value for us while we are progressing through our research. For example, like I hinted at in my presentation, the group's connections to the community will be really helpful, for example, for recruiting participants, for reflecting on our findings, and also for disseminating our findings beyond just academia.
There was one point I remember where you came to us in a supervision meeting and you said the reference group is not happy about something. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was actually about the engagement I shared in the reference group where we were talking or planning one of the projects. And I had a sample recruitment flyer created that I brought with me to the reference group to get feedback on. And honestly, the group's feedback was quite eye-opening in that there were heaps of things they felt needed changing. And I really appreciated their honesty in this because it obviously helped us improve our materials for our study, but it also helped me learn more about sort of generally about making materials more engaging and accessible, which will help me for future projects as well.
And I and your other supervisors had signed off on the previous version,
Yeah,
so
we
that
all
wouldn't
did.
have happened otherwise. Yeah. Well, what advice for other people setting up a reference group for a PhD program? What are the key things you'd suggest?
So I guess I shared a few takeaways in my presentation, but in addition to that, I would say it can be really helpful to take time before building a reference group to think about who you want to be in the group and how you want to engage them. So you may want to spend a bit of time perhaps drawing up a matrix of the different backgrounds you'd like represented and creating an engagement plan. But I would also say that while planning is important, don't get hung up on getting it right from the get-go. I think the whole process is the learning process for everyone involved, and you will get to know your group and their preferences over time, and you can make adjustments along the way. And I actually think people really appreciate this because it makes them feel like they are able to shape how the group is run. Yeah, and maybe before we end our conversation, Mark, I have to throw in a bit of a teaser. We are planning to write up a paper at the end of my PhD about the tips and tricks we've learned from running a reference group. This is obviously still a while away, but I guess I just wanted to say stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes. So I guess we'll throw back to Stacey at this point to talk about the other project.
Hi, thanks Mark and Cornelia. I am going to share my screen now and hope that that goes smoothly. Just confirmation that that is sharing.
Sue speaking, not yet.
Okay, I will try again.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So yeah, thanks again to Cornelia and Mark. It is Stacey speaking now. And I am going to talk about another project which has incorporated both co-design and research. And this project is being done in collaboration with the NDRP Quality and Safeguards Commission and has been implemented over the past 18 months. So I will start by providing some brief context to the project. So specialist disability accommodation is funded by the National Disability Insurance Scheme for people who require specifically designed housing to maximise their independence and improve the efficiency of person-to-person support. So SDA includes a range of housing typologies, such as apartments, villas, duplexes and houses. And it also has a range of on-site support, on-site outreach and scheduled support arrangements available. And while SDA has the potential to offer NDIS participants increased choice and control over their housing and support arrangements, A recent report highlighted the power imbalances between disability, housing and support providers and NDIS participants. So to address this, it's really essential that people who choose to live in SDA are informed consumers who can exercise agency over their housing and support services. So people need to know their rights and how to take action when they feel they're in a situation that is putting their rights at risk. And at the same time, providers need to change their approaches and mindsets. So this project co-designed and co-created a series of resources to help meet this need. So I will start by providing an overview of the broader project. This is a very high-level summary of the co-design and co-creation processes. Both the co-design and co-creation phase included 3 stakeholder groups who participated as contributors. These stakeholders or co-design contributors were NDIS participants, NDIS providers, and supporters of NDIS participants. And by engaging NDIS participants and also NDIS providers throughout this process, we hope to not only create useful solutions, but also to get engagement and buy-in from NDIS providers in implementing these solutions. These workshops were facilitated by our skilled co-design team. These facilitators have experience in design methods and thinking, as well as extensive experience working with people with disability, including people with cognitive and communication impairments. So the co-design phase started with a needs analysis to identify priorities and barriers of effective resources. The co-design workshops then explored, described and prioritised a range of potential solutions. Specifications for the highest priority resources were also co-designed during this phase. And then next in the co-creation phase, the resources were developed from these co-designed specifications. And this phase really involved contributors taking an active role in the development and iterative review of the resources. And it also included a user testing and resource refinement component. So the user testing was completed with people with disability who weren't included in the co-design or co-creation of the resources, and this was to gain some additional feedback and refine the resources further. So that brings us to now. The resources have been developed. They are about to be launched and disseminated using a range of channels, including podcasts, social media, and launch workshops. But now I will talk about the research component of this project. And I'll just highlight that research evaluation in co-design is really important because it does help us assess the quality of the process and also what's been created beyond the perspectives of those who were involved in the design. So it really brings an objective view and it can highlight areas for improvement and also provide insight into the usefulness and impact of the solutions that have been co-designed. So the components in white were managed and implemented by the research team, and we sought ethics approval for these components. We started with a desktop scan to identify and review existing resources and data so that the resources developed through co-design expanded on what is currently available and avoided duplication. After the co-design and co-creation phase, we evaluated the experience of participating in the workshops. We wanted to understand the experience of participating in co-design from the perspective of both the contributors and the facilitators, including any enablers and barriers to participating in co-design, as well as potential areas for improvement. So we asked facilitators and service providers and supporters of NDIS participants to complete a survey. But as we were particularly interested in the experience of people with disability through this process, we invited these contributors to participate in a one-on-one semi-structured interview about their experience in each of these phases. So that was the first part of the evaluation that focused on the experience of participating in the co-design and co-creation processes. We also have designed a final evaluation to assess the usability and impact of the resources and to also monitor and refine these resources over time. So that is an overview of the broader project and how we integrated a research evaluation into the co-design process. Through this process, we identified a gap. We realised that there was no suitable way to assess resources that were designed for people with a disability. So while existing measures and tools could evaluate the resources, they either lacked accessibility or relevance to the resources being created. So that meant they really wouldn't generate many meaningful findings. So to ensure that our evaluation method was accessible and meaningful, we co-created a pilot measure of resource quality. And by using a co-creation method, we really hope that the measure would be more accessible for use by people with disability, including people with cognitive and communication impairments. And we also hope that the evaluation of resources would therefore more effectively identify areas where the resources could be improved and be more accessible and useful. So this project is an example of how co-design can identify gaps in research, but then also how co-creation can be used as a research method to fill that gap in a meaningful way. So I'll move on to discussing our process in developing the measure now. We really wanted to know what makes a resource easy to use, likely to be used in practice, and effective of meeting the needs of users from the perspective of people with disability. So to co-create the measure, we facilitated 4 online workshops with 4 people with disability with the support from our co-design team. And here is an overview of the measure development process, including the workshops and what we as the researchers did in between. So the co-design team supported the facilitation of the workshops, as well as assisted with the development of the workshop content and summaries. And this was really critical to ensure that the workshops were doable, accessible, and inclusive of all contributors. And I'll just note that we intentionally followed a process similar to traditional measure development methods to maintain rigour in developing this measure. The key difference here was undertaking the process in a workshop format and really letting the contributors guide the item development and the format of the measure. So adopting this co-creation approach also involved breaking down technical aspects that are traditionally involved in measure development. So breaking this down into practical applications without relying on research jargon. So I'll just give a summary of what we did in each of the workshops now. In workshop 1, we wanted to identify features of a good quality resource. We did this by asking the contributors 4 questions about what they think makes a good quality resource. You can see an example of one of the questions and the features that were identified by the contributors on the slide. After the workshop, the researchers identified similarities between the features and then created 3 categories. We looked at existing measures that are designed to evaluate resources to find any features that may not have been captured in that workshop. We didn't find many, but we did add the few that we came across to the relevant categories. We shared the categories and associated features with the contributors to review prior to the next workshop. So in workshop 2, after asking the contributors to provide feedback on the categories and contribute any features that were missing, we facilitated an activity using the Moscow prioritization technique. This allowed us to sort the features in each category into must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and will-not-haves. And you can see an example of this on the slide. Following the workshop, we omitted any features that were classified as will not haves and used the must have and should have features to form the initial list of items. And you can see examples on the slide of how we developed the measure items from those features. We then shared this initial list of items with the contributors in the format shown here. So in workshop 3, we moved into more technical aspects of measure development. So first we reviewed the items as a group and refined any items that were unclear or not relevant. And then next we discussed potential formats. So to do this, we provided the group with examples of different response format options and the known pros and cons of each. So we discussed previously researched elements of measure development and what resonated with the contributors' lived experience of using measures. So during this phase of the measure development, we had to be, as researchers, really mindful of the technical aspects of measure development that and remove a lot of the jargon that is also often included in this part of the process. This was a really good experience for us as researchers as well. So we discussed the format of the scale and whether or not the scale should have a middle point, as you can see on the slide here. We discussed how many response options there should be, ranging from 3 to 10. We discussed the preferred labeling of responses, for example, using words or smiley faces. We talked about the preferred way to select responses, an example being drop downs or radio buttons, which are the example on the slide here. And we also reviewed potential open-ended questions. After the workshop, we used the information gathered from discussions to develop this draft measure of the pilot measure. In workshop 4, we then tested and reviewed the pilot measure. The contributors reviewed an online resource and used the pilot measure to evaluate it. And as a group, we then discussed how long it took to complete. We gathered feedback on the rating scale items, the open-ended questions, and the response format. And as you can see on the slide, the contributors provided practical solutions to the problems that were identified with the measure. We then implemented these changes to the measure, which resulted in our pilot measure of resource quality. So this is a visual representation of the first part of the pilot measure. In total, there are 11 rating scales that use smiley faces with agree, disagree labelled underneath. We also have 3 optional open-ended questions at the end of the measure. And we believe this pilot measure is a more practical tool than the existing ones for evaluating the acceptability, feasibility, and usability of resources for people with disability. So that is the co-creation process we undertook to develop our pilot measure. And I will just show this slide again because it highlights how the co-creation of the measure fits in with the bigger project described earlier. So we tested and refined the measure during the user testing component, while also using this as an opportunity to gain some information about the resources and refine the resources before they were launched. And now we are using the measure in the final evaluation of the resources. So I will quickly discuss some key learnings, starting with a key challenge that we have encountered. One of the key challenges is balancing time and workload. So co-design can be a significant time investment and can introduce workload pressures. So it's important to consider the preparation time, workshop length, time of day, how often meetings are happening, and whether these factors are appropriate or burdensome for the contributors in your group. For example, the frequency of meetings really needs to work for co-designers' schedules and be frequent enough to maintain engagement, but it also needs to give facilitators enough time to implement and share any follow-up work. Also, just to note, a good practice is to start each workshop with a summary of the overall workshop schedule, as well as provide a recap of what was provided in the previous session, as well as a summary of what will be discussed in the current session. So I'll talk about some key considerations for effective co-design as well. So starting with a preparation phase to clarify roles, expectations, and communication preferences. So it's also good in this phase to recognise that some people may also be new to co-design or unfamiliar with engaging in work that gains insight from their lived experience. So this preparation phase can be really useful to clarify what is expected in the workshops and to support meaningful engagement, so to really understand the needs and preferences of all of the contributors in the workshop. During this phase, it's also useful to situate in why the co-design is happening and the purpose of it. So include an overview of the structure, what it is for, and be transparent about who it is funded by. So always contextualize what you are doing in co-design and why. Sorry. Also allow time in workshops for reflective learning and peer support. So one way to do this is to schedule breaks where people can chat informally and build relationships with other co-designers. Also ensure that facilitators are skilled to support meaningful engagement. So this includes managing group dynamics, addressing power imbalances, managing time, and also adapting to changes in real time. Also ensure that workshop design and content is clear and accessible. One way to do this is to pilot workshops, as this can enhance the clarity and inclusivity of the workshops. Also ensure that workshops have a structure and a clear goal, but also balance this structure with flexibility. So allow sufficient time for each workshop and design the overall process to accommodate adjustments based on any feedback you might receive along the way. Great, and that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the team at Summer Foundation. So thank you, Cornelia, Mark, and Stacey. And I know, Kate, you haven't been speaking, but you've also been involved. It's really great to hear your insights about what you've learned along the way and that vision you had for co-design, and then being able to adapt and learn along the way. So thank you so much. And also how you are evaluating the co-design. That's yeah, really great to hear. We'll now move on to our panel discussion and Q&A, and there's been some fantastic questions coming up in the chat. Please do keep them coming. We'll explore some of the common challenges, practical tips, and some of the practices you learned about the best ways for embedding co-design in research. So I'll hand over to Gillian, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much. It's Gillian speaking again, and I hope, Mary, you'll keep your camera on too, because I might rope you in on some of the questions. I mean, Mary previously has been CEO of Children and Young People with Disability, and also, you know, a researcher in your own right. And I quite like actually that my colleagues here on the screen have been in different roles in co-design. Some of you I know better than others. But it is very much that case where you bring your professional hat, perhaps, or your professional experience, and then you end up in lots of different roles in the process. Some rules of engagement for our panel discussion. So there's a range of people here. We have all introduced ourselves before, but before you go to answer a question, if you could just say your name again, so that's helpful to the captioner, and also just for me in finding where you are on the screen. For those people listening, if you have questions, if you've already put them in the chat, we've put them in a list of questions that's here. We're going to do our best to get to them, but also do our best not to kind of rush through. So if there's stuff that you have asked and we don't cover, we'll try and follow up with some answers afterwards. So there'll be recordings of this later, and then a summary of stuff that we've talked about, as well as some answers to questions we don't cover. Keep asking questions in the chat. And I'm going to take the liberty of starting with my own question, if that's okay. Actually, that's not entirely true. Jess Wilcox in the chat asked a similar question. And I wonder if you all reflect, and then I'll pick someone to answer, on how you've made a decision about whether you're the right person to lead a research co-design project, or a co-design project maybe that wasn't research. And if you had any kind of thoughts about whether or not you have kind of had any business leading something, if you're working with co-designers and you didn't have the direct lived experience, how you manage that. I mean, there's sometimes co-facilitating can be an option, sometimes spending time on building the conditions so that power can be shared can work quite well. But some personal reflections on that, I think, would be a great way to get started. And I'm also wondering if, Jody, if you're still here, and there's your square, do you want to turn your camera on and join us as well? Now, I'm looking around at reactions of people. Nobody's panicked in particular. Alex, do you mind starting with a reflection on that? How do you decide if you've got any business leading the co-design of anything, and yeah, what you might do if you're not quite sure?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I think, yeah, obviously, if you're building on existing partnerships or through your networks, you've been put in touch with someone that can help with the co-design. But recently I've been approached, for instance, to do some co-design work in an area where I don't feel comfortable in terms of what I can contribute. partly because I don't have the skills or expertise in that particular topic. So I think it is also important to say no sometimes, but try and put that partnership in touch with someone else that does perhaps have the skills and the expertise. So it's really, do I have enough time? Do I feel that I can contribute in a meaningful way to both the co-design process, but also the actual research topic? Yeah, so often it's always, yeah, the research has emerged because of existing projects that we continue to build on. So that makes the decision a bit easier.
Jill speaking. Yeah, thanks for that reflection. I want to also kind of admit or just declare that I have changed my ways of thinking and doing in this space over the years. I've absolutely done stuff that I never would do again, or taken on leadership roles in spaces where, you know, I didn't understand the cultures and the needs and ways of working that would create safety or even just create like an environment for creativity. It's a project I'm doing a bit of work on still, where the project itself is led by a researcher who doesn't have lived experience, because the project involves lots of things, but the segments of it that are co-design are led by two people who have a lived experience of fatigue after stroke, and they've done so much work in almost kind of gathering and preparing everyone else in the process, shaping the kinds of questions, and then they've engaged the research team when the research team is like, well, everyone's on the research team, the researcher members of the team, kind of when they needed them. So that's been a good process of learning too. And my brain's also being distracted by the chat. I'll have a look there. I'm coming to you in a minute, Jody, because I'd love to know more about how you built up relationships or understood which kinds of relationships and authority was needed in different communities. But while you're thinking about that, Stacey or Cornelia, do you have another reflection on how to figure out what bits of the process you should lead and what bits you should maybe work together with others from or step back from?
Stacey, do you want me to take that, or?
Sure, Cornelia.
Yeah, okay. Maybe for me it's a bit different too, because I come in as a student. So I feel sort of the relationship I've built with my members from the beginning was very much from the point of view that I'm here to learn from the reference group. So that kind of was a really nice setup, I feel. But also we are really lucky at Summer to have a co-design team who are really experienced and have very strong relationships with a lot of the people we are working with already. And I don't know about the workshops that you were running, Stacey, but for me, especially at the beginning, we often had another facilitator there in the group sessions to kind of, I guess, provide a bit of that connection and help me with facilitating, because it was also the first time for me to facilitate a group session, which is, a whole skill to learn.
Thanks, Jill speaking again. I'm wondering if Mark, as a supervisor, did you observe any, if it's okay to maybe not critique Cornelia's ways of working here, but anything you've learned or advice that you were able to give that supported working well in that context?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that struck me, I think I'm remembering back to my PhD and just how much imposter syndrome I had back in the day. And a thing that's kind of been really interesting watching Cornelia come into this topic she's doing is just the amount of confidence and sort of curious authority she kind of comes into supervision meetings with, because she has a whole lot of conversations and anecdotes that have come from the reference group that she can bring to the discussions. It kind of changes the power dynamic in a way where, as supervisors, we've got, oh, I did a study years ago where this was my experience, this works really well. And she can say, well, actually, I talked to the reference group about that, and they have a different opinion. And I think it might kind of even out things a lot more. So yeah, I'd be interested in whether there should be more of that, particularly when student projects are involved, or or early career research as well in particular.
Bill speaking again. That's I'm having lots of reflections as you're speaking too, and I love someone's put in the chat the term curious authority. I really like that one, and I like this relationship that's building with the supervisor and the student in a different way than I'd thought about before. I might throw to Jody. The specific question that we have is how you built trust with the community and make decisions about who would be involved. So happy for you to take that question anywhere it needs to go to talk about, how do you actually predict how much work it will be, how much time is needed, and or know when to kind of like change the course of the work. But I'll leave that one with you.
Look, yes, it's a big question, isn't it? Look, I think ultimately the main priority has to be how you work with the community, how you establish those relationships initially in community. You need to find the right person who will then guide you and work with you into community. It could be another individual within community, or it could actually be someone that could have just read something more recently and they've done some more research and they've got a bit of understanding and they might have that point of contact. It's all about how you get into the space and working into that space efficiently. I have been so very fortunate with traveling nationwide for, we are talking almost 40 years doing this type of work. So I'm very fortunate. Not only do I have the lived experience, but I've also got established frameworks and established relationships with community, not necessarily with one particular individual, but even their family members now, and even looking back, linking to family lineages. And that then benefits us and how we engage within certain communities. And if we do have additional information that then benefits community, I will share that knowledge and then get their permission to share knowledge to other communities. Like when the NDIS started rolling out, a lot of people had no idea what the NDIS was. So going into communities and sharing that information develops that level of trust. It might have been brief, but it's still informative. So I think a part of all that is just ensuring about what relationships I need to foster and what my ultimate aim is to benefit community. And there are times I have to say no. Look, there are times I have to say no. Look, sorry, this is not something part of my remit. I can't do this. I don't think perhaps the community is ready. Perhaps I'm not ready. It's not necessarily, they don't have the runs on the board yet to be able to do these sorts of things. Even organisations I'm working with, they might not have the capacity building to develop those relationships. So there is a lot of ongoing pressure on me, I guess, to sort of carry that information and that knowledge across to different people. But my role ultimately is to make sure that when I am vouching for people, then these individuals that I'm vouching for have to be there through like a cultural lens and a culturally affirming lens, not through an academic lens, not through any other lens. It's got to be a culturally safe lens. So I think that's something that I've done. Alex, I know, has done. And just working with other researchers and other professionals, I think that's initially the first step, to ensure that you are looking at a strong lead and ensuring that the process is authentic.
Bill speaking. So much gold there. Oh,
You have
sorry,
to pardon my distractedness there. I've got family stealing me bickies, would you believe?
Bill speaking. Now I just really want bickies. All right. As well as the bickies, you just shared a lot of really useful knowledge there, and it's got me thinking about this reality that we have intentions to co-design something, and we have to get funding for the work, and we have to get also often a good enough plan ready to submit to an ethics committee for some of this work. And both of those two structural pieces try and take out flexibility, right? And I'm thinking there's lots of different tips and hacks I think we all share in the community, and we hope as a National Disability Research Partnership to do some work in the sharing of knowledge between everyone. But Anna's asked in the chat about how you navigate that balance between planning enough in detail for these ethics, or well, you were asking about funding, but I'll throw in ethics reviews as well, and maintaining the flexibility. I'm wanting to ask Mary and then Stacey about these from two different perspectives, because Mary, perhaps in times where you've been engaged by researchers who have come and will say, this is our plan and we can't change it now because it's funded. How, has there been things you've learned where you've been able to negotiate that process?
Mary speaking. No, thank you for that one. And for those of you who don't know, in a previous role, I was CEO of the National Disability Representative Organisation, Children and Young People with Disability Australia. So it's in that context where we were often asked to partner on research. And I can see some of our DRO colleagues and disabled persons organisations like Mia from Youth Disability Advocacy Service, and we've got Women with Disabilities Victoria and other advocacy organisations on the line. So I won't be telling you anything you don't know. One of the most frustrating things for organisations that are representative of people with disability is what we have is great connections with people with disability. And when you are asked to partner, and that expertise and that knowledge about how to accessibly engage with the cohort, in our case, when I was at CIDA, it was children and young people. And I know Liz is on the line from CIDA, so I'm not meaning to speak to you for you, Liz, because you're still at CIDA. But how do you authentically engage young people? Maybe very different to how you might engage with adults, for example. So I think one of the important things for our upcoming research round is we're really trying to value those perspectives as well. And so how do we make sure that, and it's kind of back to your pie diagram that you posted in the chat, how do we make sure that you presented, Jill, how do we make sure that we've got a team where everyone's contributing, and not as an afterthought thinking, oh, we must involve, we're doing a project about young people, we must involve CIDA, but you've already designed the resources, or you're doing a project about women with disabilities and you think, well, we must involve Women with Disability Victoria, but you've already designed it, you've already done it. That's coming too late in the process, but I'll stop talking there.
Jill speaking again. I actually wonder if there's a extra bit there, Mary, though, about what do you do when you are approached and you might think this is actually very important, it's not done properly. How do you make a go, no-go call, or how can you actually change stuff about it?
Sometimes you can't, Jill, because it's too late. The deadline might be a week away before you, when you get approached. And so then it's just respectfully pushing back and saying, look, if you're funded, we'd love to work with you, but we'll need to think a lot about this methodology. And I guess keeping doors open is always my point, was always my point of view. But the teams that approach very early in the project for partnership are the ones that you want to work with, because then you can be involved in the design of the grant application, the processes and things like that. So I think the key message I'd give is, if you're looking to develop partnerships as part of this research funding, start early. Don't wait until a week before the grant application's due.
Jill speaking. Thanks, Mary. We'll cut that snippet out and put it all over our communications. I'm going to pose probably the last substantial question to Stacey along this same line, but I'm thinking about how you design a co-design process and document it. And if you're working with an ethics committee because you want to publish it, there's a decision made at some point about which interactions are going to result in data that you'll look at and write about. And then there's all the rest of the stuff that happens. And there's gold in those in-between conversations and the stuff that you learn with another chat with someone afterwards, or a conversation with a reference group. How do you deal with that? And while you're talking about it, I'm going to put a link to a article as well that gets into some of that detail and the challenges of working with ethics committees around that. It's got tips for moving forward. But I just want to flag also, if you feel as so inclined, you're academically minded, if you want to read the peer review notes, that further gets discussed over several rounds of review. So anyway, I'll put that in the chat. But Stacey, how do you grapple with or make decisions about what's going to be the data, and then how do you get the rest of the stuff you learn documented somewhere?
It's a really good question. I think so. For those workshops that we did for the measure, we recorded the workshops and had a transcript. So that was really the bulk of, I guess, what would be the data. And then we have the outcome of the measure. And then we will write to the process of co-design. But you're right, there is gold in the learnings as well. And I think that comes back to kind of Cornelia's approach to then writing a paper on her experience designing a reference group. So I just think there is so much to learn, and some things require the approval of ethics committee, and some things are learnings to share with the research community and the co-design community. Does that make sense? So I think there's ways that you can work within the constraint of ethics and use the data in a way that you have to kind of, with the peer review process, and gain that insight and get really valuable outcomes and solutions from co-design while working within those parameters. But then you can also share your learnings in a way as a researcher or as co-design contributors, and you can do that in partnership with the people that were engaged in the co-design workshops. So then they don't become kind of the research participants, they become more co-authors if they're so inclined. Yeah. So I think there's different approaches that you can take to overcome those challenges and to get kind of all of the wisdom from the co-design experience.
Still speaking. Yeah, I love that. And actually just always remembering you can be creative about this, right? You can publish on the thing that was planned and then make another decision if you want to partner with some of the people who are co-designers to publish something else that might be formal research or might be a blog post on stuff you learned or whatever it might be. I've really enjoyed this chat. My brain is buzzing, and I'm going to hand over to Mary to say goodbye to everyone. But just for now, it's not goodbye forever. But thanks so much for all of your wisdom that you shared.
I'd like to start with a huge thanks to all our speakers for sharing your learnings and being so frank about what you've learned, what worked, what didn't work. I think we're all really valuing that frank and open discussion. So thank you very much. I guess some key takeaways from me before we wrap up is co-design is not consultation. It's much deeper. Even though Jill's on my team, I loved your how deep is my co. You know, we really are looking for deep co-design. So thank you. We know that lived experience strengthens research by ensuring it's relevant and grounded in real world priorities. I loved your curious authority, Cornelia, in terms of you know, when the research is led by people with disability, that's the authority. So thank you for sharing that. And that flexibility, the trust and the time that's crucial for successful co-design. Thank you for sharing your lessons. And thank you for everyone who's been here as well. I've loved watching the chat and all the interactions and people sharing email addresses and things like that. That's one reason why we didn't do it as a webinar format. We want to connect and people so that they can meet everyone. Just a little bit of a plug about next steps and available resources, just to recap, and this will get posted in the chat as well. We'll be releasing our research overview for the first round, as well as our guidelines, a huge amount of FAQs. We've been working hard on those FAQs, and those FAQs will evolve as we get more questions asked. We've got our session on the 6th of March where we'll do a deep dive on our round 1 funding. So keep that in mind. And we did post before, and I'll get Sue to post the link to register for that. upcoming drop-in sessions, which will be more small group sessions, where you can actually come and ask questions. And then there'll be a whole set of resources after today's session. We'll have a summary of the key points. We'll have an FAQ of unanswered questions and links to some co-design resources as well. And we're really here to help. And please reach out if you have any questions throughout this process as we're embarking on our first funding round on the safety of people with disability. So thank you again to all our speakers, attendees, and thank you to the NDRP team, including those who are behind the scenes, who you may not have seen today. And we hope you've come away with some new ideas and inspiration for how you can embed co-design in the research moving forward. So thank you all again. And I'll give you a big clap.